Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Harry Cosmo, freelance football journalist for BBC Sport and others, and I'm here to react to Newcastle United 4, Crystal Palace 0 at St James's Park yesterday afternoon. I was on BBC Sport duty for it, so if you want to go and read my match report and analysis and a piece on Sandro Tonali as well, go to the website. Links on my Twitter page as well. What a performance for Newcastle it was. It was a really dominant performance from the start, and I think when we sort of looked at this game and you looked at Roy Hodgson coming into this game at Crystal Palace, what does his team do well? They defend well. They've only conceded 18 goals since he returned in March. You expected Crystal Palace to make it difficult for Newcastle, to give them a tough afternoon, to make them wait for opportunities to unlock them, but it took just 4 minutes for Newcastle to break through, and they'd already threatened to do that once or twice before then. A lovely little cushion pass from Kieran Trippier. He's done that a couple of times against West Ham as well, but that sort of outrageously sumptuous little one-touch pass from him into Jacob Murphy. That Murphy loops it over Sam Johnston. Didn't mean to, he kind of admitted after the game. But loops it over Sam Johnston, 1-0 after 4 minutes. And it makes such a difference when you open the game up like that. Obviously, that it was called offside initially, but Trippier's run was deemed onside by VAR. And then that sort of set the tone for the game. Crystal Palace couldn't come and sit deep and do what they were probably originally planning to. Obviously, as I mentioned in the preview, it was under Patrick Vieira at the time, but a 0-0 draw at St James's Park, 3 0-0 draws actually against Newcastle last season. They were one of the teams that did best to shut them out. So they'll be disappointed with how they got on overall yesterday. They didn't stem the tide on the right-hand side at all between Trippier, Murphy and Sean Longstaff. They absolutely tore Palace apart from there. But also Bruno Guimaraes in the middle, and Joe Linton against Che Kouyaté and Jefferson Lerma, who were the two of the changes that Palace made yesterday, and they just weren't up to speed with the game at all. Newcastle overran them, and that just sort of, as I say, set the tone for the whole game, really. Newcastle were just so dominant, and actually, if you look at at the time, they created more chances. They were 3-0 up at half time. It sort of reminded me a little bit of the Sheffield United game in the first half, where they were 3-0 up, but there could have been many more, because there were a couple of opportunities that weren't put away from that sort of right midfield combination between Murphy and Trippier and Longstaff. A couple of crosses that went either through and evaded everybody, or were cleared by Palace, and then Anthony Gordon hits the post, or hits the bar, sorry, and then at that point you're thinking, Newcastle going to rue this, and then Gordon scores, makes it 2-0, and that kind of kills the momentum of any chance of Palace coming back. And then Longstaff makes it 3 just before half-time, and it's good night, really. And there were a few little flashes of what Palace could do going forward in that first half, in terms of breaking through. I mean, Will Hughes had a couple of opportunities at Odsonne Edouard as well, and that sort of continued in the second half, but Newcastle were kind of keeping them at arm's length all the way through. And whenever they did break, Newcastle just attacked straight back, and that's kind of symptomatic with the fourth goal. I mean, it's Odsonne Edouard hits a shot, it goes on target, sort of Nick Pope catches it and then releases it to Trippier, who releases it to Jacob Murphy, and then straight away Newcastle are up the pitch, and Callum Wilson scoring a fourth goal. That was kind of the sort of theme of the game. Newcastle were just on top and dominant all the way through, and it's another example of that progression that I've mentioned before, and plenty of other people have mentioned as well, of how Newcastle have developed from being a pressing team who need to react to certain things and spring a trap to sort of win the ball high, and that sort of sets the tone. If they can't do that, then they struggle. Now they just dominate the ball, and they make chances, and they're unlocking teams that are trying to sit deep, and that's a real positive. Newcastle have beaten Burnley, they've beaten Brentford, and they're now beaten Palace. If you think about last season, they didn't beat Leeds at home, they didn't beat Bournemouth at home, and they didn't beat Palace at home. So those are 3 examples of how Newcastle have actually progressed, and I think that's a real positive going forward. And overall, just a superb performance. On the injury front, it looks like Sven Botman's going to be missing for Wednesday and a couple more games, a couple of weeks away, Eddie Howe said, for him. And Alexander Isak came off the bench, and that was a positive. I think he'll probably start on Wednesday against Dortmund. Joe Linton being back was obviously a huge thing as well. But in terms of the other thing to mention was obviously Sandro Tonali, who came off the bench to a rapturous applause, and when he was warming up was a rapturous applause, and War Flags had a banner in support of him. Obviously, his current situation is well documented, but Newcastle rallied around him, and I think that's what Eddie Howard said pre-game. He wanted the crowd to throw their arms around him, and that's what they did, and lots of praise for him after the game from both Jacob Murphy and Anthony Gordon. As I say, there's a piece on BBC Sport website written by myself with those quotes, and Eddie Howe as well, sort of admitting that it's going to get difficult. We don't know when his band's going to get announced, but it's likely to be a long one. Going into Wednesday, they couldn't have wanted a better performance. As I say, there's it's a little bit like the Brentford game in the sense that it was a hurdle to attack before the more exciting, more glamorous tie at Milan, and that they could then look forward to it with all their might. And I think that's kind of a similar sort of story for Newcastle going into this one. Dortmund won on Friday night against Werder Bremen. Watched it. They were okay, but I think they're going to struggle to deal with Newcastle in the way that they're going forward, because everything about it, and the fact that Murphy came in for Almiron and did exactly what he did and performed so well, linked up so well with Trippier, kind of shows that it's not just about the personnel, it's also about the style and the approach and the identity of the team that sort of means that whoever plays, they're going to play the same way, and that's a real positive going forward. Wilson, I thought in the first half, the lack of movement meant that Isak would have been a better choice if fit to start this game. There was a few chances where Trippier played the ball through, and someone with more mobility might well have gotten the end of it. There was a point where it was, there was a question whether this would be one of those games for Newcastle and whether they would get caught out. As I say, they kept Palace at arm's length, and Palace were missing Eze and missing Elise, and that was really sort of paid to what they could do in attack. They lacked creativity anyway at the best of times, but without those two, they were never really going to threaten a Newcastle team that has now scored 22 goals and conceded 3 in the last 8 games since that Brighton defeat at the start of September. It's such a great turnaround, and if you look at the fixtures, it's potentially, you can understand how they've done that, but you've got to beat what's in front of you. And when the fixtures get tougher again in November, they're going to be in such a good place, confidence-wise, to go forward. It was a really good performance. Fantastic to get such a good response to Sandro Tonali as well. I think what was really telling, though, again, was how good Kieran Trippier was. Every game now, he's just so influential. There's an argument to say he's the best signing of the modern era. £12 million, and I don't remember a player who's had such an impact on the team in pretty much every sense than him. He's been absolutely phenomenal, and as I say, just a brilliant player, and that impact, as I say, you can't really quantify that with any money. £12 million is an incredible fee that you've paid for him, but what he brings on the pitch in terms of leadership, in terms of making players around him better, I think he's done that for both Murphy and Almiron in front of him. He's just such a creative outlet as well. Everything about him is brilliant, and Jacob Murphy said that he's one of the best in the world in his position, and it's very hard to argue with that. So yeah, fantastic performance. 5 home wins in a row. Newcastle up to 5th, 4 points behind the top 4 now, right back in that race. And it's on to Wednesday. I'll be back to preview that game later in the week. I won't be at St James Park for the presser. I've got another engagement, but I hopefully will be for the match. So weather permitting, I'll be at St James's Park to bring you some reaction to the Dortmund game immediately pitch side. So I'll see you then. Please continue to like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you later. Cheers.